Welcome to Warriors Rulers Legacy channel, where history comes alive. Join us as we delve into the epic tales of legendary warriors and rulers, uncovering their legacies and the impact they left on the world. Today, we will explore the life and legacy of one of Europe's most formidable and underfunded defenders, who, against overwhelming odds, showcased strategic brilliance and unwavering resolve in fiercely defending his homeland and delaying Ottoman expansion despite limited resources. Born in 1405, Gjergj Kastrioti, commonly known as Skanderbeg, was an Albanian feudal lord and military commander who led a successful rebellion against the Ottoman Empire in what is today Albania, North Macedonia, Greece, Kosovo, Montenegro, and Serbia. Skanderbeg ranks high in the military history of that time as the most persistent and ever victorious opponent of the Ottoman Empire during its heyday, halting their efforts to spread Islam through a predominantly Roman Catholic Western Europe. During the 14th and 15th centuries, several Albanian principalities emerged under local noblemen. The Bulgarian and Byzantine empires, already weakened by internal strife, faced the Ottoman Empire in a series of wars from 1345 to 1396. The Serbian Empire expanded quickly as the Bulgarian and Byzantine empires were weakening. However, the Serbian Empire fell after its defeat at the Battle of Maritsa on September 26, 1371. After the fall of the short-lived Serbian Empire in 1355, Albanian principalities grew in prominence, taking advantage of the political vacuum to strengthen their own realms and assert greater autonomy. However, their autonomy was challenged by the Ottoman invasion. The Principate of Kastrioti was founded by Skanderbeg's father, Gjergj Kastrioti, who expanded his territory through political maneuvers. In a short time, Gjergj managed to expand its lands from originally 2 small villages so as to become the undisputed lord of central Albania. In 1422, after a failed rebellions, Gjergj was forced to send Skanderbeg and his 3 older brothers as hostages to the Ottoman court as part of the practice of devshirme. Devshirme, also known as the child levy, was a notable practice implemented by the Ottoman Empire. Under this system, Christian boys from the Balkan regions were forcibly taken from their families, subjected to conversion to Islam, and rigorously trained to serve the state in various capacities. Forced to conform to the practices of Islam, Skanderbeg was subjected to merciless training at which he excelled, proving himself to be both a physically powerful warrior and eventually also a brilliant field commander. During this time, he gained the trust of the Ottoman Sultan Murad II and rose through the military ranks, becoming a skilled and respected commander. For his successful military campaigns, the Ottoman Sultan Murad II himself honored him by bestowing upon him the name of his conqueror, Lord Alexander, comparing him favorably to the Macedonian conqueror Alexander the Great. In 1428, inspired by Venice, Gjergj led a rebellion to relieve pressure during the Siege of Thessalonica. The Siege of Thessalonica from 1422 to 1430 saw the city, a critical Byzantine stronghold, ultimately fall to Ottoman Sultan Murad II after prolonged resistance, marking a significant Ottoman victory. The Venetians, who had taken control of the city in 1423, were unable to defend it, leading to its brutal sacking. This loss redirected Sultan Murad II's focus to quelling Albanian insurrections, including those led by Gjergj. The Ottomans' renewed attention in military might eventually lead to his defeat and the consolidation of Ottoman power in Albania. Despite this, Skanderbeg continued to remain loyal to Sultan Murad II and didn't join his father's rebellion. To subdue the Albanian nobles, the Ottomans started implementing the Timar system. Under this system, the Ottomans granted land, Timars, to military officers and officials in exchange for their military service. This allowed the Ottomans to maintain control over the land and its produce, effectively reducing the power and influence of the local Albanian nobility and ensuring their dominance in the region. Between 1432 and 1436, Gjergj joined an uprising led by Gjergj Kastrioti, which resulted in Gjergj's defeat, but saw victories in 4 battles for Gjergj Kastrioti and 1 victory for Andriadophia. In the late 1435, Pope Eugene IV actively sought additional military support and funds to bolster the efforts of the revolt. reaching out to various European leaders and noblemen to garner their assistance. Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund of Luxembourg sent Fruzin, a Bulgarian nobleman, and in early 1436, a pretender to the Ottoman throne, to negotiate the possibility of forming a coalition with the rebels. However, by mid-1436, a large Ottoman force led by Turhan Bey was assembled. Despite achieving some military victories, the rebels' lack of central leadership ultimately led to their defeat. Turhan's forces eventually subdued the revolt and marched through Albania, committing widespread massacres of civilians as they advanced. Despite the suppression of the main revolt, various rural areas remained in a state of rebellion, continuing to resist Ottoman control and refusing to submit to their authority. These pockets of resistance demonstrated the resilience and determination of the local population. The defeat took a toll on John, and he eventually died a broken man in 1439 and was buried at the Albanian Tower on Mount Athos in modern-day Greece. After his father's death and witnessing the brutal suppression of regional uprisings, Skanderbeg decided to abandon the Ottomans and was waiting for the right moment. In the tumultuous year of 1443, the Battle of Niš raged on, a chaotic clash between the forces of the Hungarian commander John Hunyadi and the Ottoman Empire. Amidst the turmoil, Skanderbeg saw an opportunity. Seizing the moment, Skanderbeg with 300 Albanian horsemen slipped away under the cover of night, evading Ottoman patrols as they made their way through treacherous terrain towards Albania. Their journey was fraught with danger, but their determination never wavered. Upon reaching Albania, Skanderbeg set his sights on the fortress of Kruje, a key stronghold that had fallen under Ottoman control. He devised a cunning plan to reclaim it, crafting a forged letter, purportedly from Sultan Murad II. He commanded the governor of Kruje to surrender the fortress to him. The governor, deceived by the authenticity of the letter, allowed Skanderbeg and his forces inside. In a swift and decisive strike, his men overpowered the Ottoman garrison, and the fortress of Kruje was reclaimed. The House of Kastrioti hoisted the double-headed eagle, today's Albanian flag, high above the battlements, heralding a new era of resistance. With Kruje secured, Skanderbeg launched a series of campaigns to capture surrounding castles and strongholds. His reputation as a brilliant strategist and fearless leader grew with each victory. The local population, inspired by his leadership, rallied to his cause, bolstering his forces and strengthening the resistance. In March of 1444, Skanderbeg convened the historic League of Lezhë. This coalition of Albanian nobles united under his leadership, pledging to resist Ottoman domination. The League of Lezhë symbolized the unification of the Albanian forces and the collective resolve to fight for their freedom. His leadership and strategic acumen were pivotal in uniting the Albanian nobles and coordinating their resistance against the Ottomans. In a symbolic act of defiance against the Ottoman Empire, Skanderbeg publicly converted back to Christianity, embracing his faith and heritage. This conversion further solidified his position as a leader of the Christian resistance, inspiring his followers through his actions and faith. The League's first military challenge came in the spring of 1444, when Skanderbeg's scouts reported that the Ottoman army was planning to invade Albania. Skanderbeg planned to move towards the anticipated entry point and prepared for an engagement. He organized an army of 10,000 to 15,000 men assembled from the League of Lezhë and advanced towards the planned battle site in Lower Dibra, believed to be the plain of Shumbat, formerly the plain of Torvioll. Realizing the threat posed by Skanderbeg's new state, Sultan Murad II sent one of his most experienced generals, Ali Pasha, to crush the Albanian League with a force of 25,000 to 40,000 men. The night before the Battle of Torvioll, Skanderbeg and his commanders held a crucial war council to finalize their strategy. The Albanian troops remained quiet and extinguished all their campfires, preparing for the surprise attack that would follow the next day. They were farmers to defend their homeland from the invading Ottoman forces. Meanwhile, the Ottoman soldiers, confident of a sure victory, were celebrating and making approaches to the Albanian camp, provoking the Albanians. Unaware of Skanderbeg's plans, the Ottomans were unprepared for the tactics that would be employed against them. Skanderbeg employed a clever tactic to deceive the Ottoman forces. By luring the Ottomans into the valley, Skanderbeg aimed to neutralize their numerical superiority and use guerrilla tactics to his advantage. The narrow valley restricted the movement of the Ottoman forces, making it difficult for them to maneuver and deploy their troops effectively. This allowed Skanderbeg's smaller, more agile army to launch surprise attacks and disrupt the Ottoman formations. Skanderbeg positioned his forces at the bottom of a hill, appearing vulnerable and inviting the Ottomans to attack. His army split into 3 groups, with one group positioned at the front to engage the Ottomans directly, while the other 2 groups were hidden in the surrounding forests and mountains. Skanderbeg's army, composed of 8,000 cavalry and 7,000 infantry, was strategically positioned to take advantage of the terrain. Ali Pasha's forces initiated an attack on Skanderbeg's army and feigned a retreat to lure them. However, Skanderbeg, familiar with Ottoman tactics, prevented his troops from chasing. Confident in their numerical superiority and noticing the lack of cavalry support, Ali Pasha's Ottoman army ordered a full attack and advanced downhill to engage the Albanian forces. Once the Ottoman forces were fully engaged and descending the hill, Skanderbeg signaled the hidden Albanian troops on the right to launch an attack from the rear and flanks. Although Ali Pasha initially managed to stabilize the situation by repositioning his troops, Skanderbeg then ordered the left flank to attack, which caused chaos and confusion among the Ottoman ranks. As the Albanian forces began surrounding them, Ali Pasha managed to escape, but the rest of the Ottoman army was utterly destroyed. The result was the death of around 20,000 dead and wounded and about 2,000 captured. The Albanians suffered 120 casualties and 4,000 wounded. This victory significantly boosted the morale of the Albanian forces and consolidated Skanderbeg's leadership in the League of Lezhë. Skanderbeg's unexpected triumph resonated across Europe, boosting the morale of Christian states and inspiring them to resist Ottoman expansion. This victory also encouraged Pope Eugenius IV and John Hunyadi to organize a new crusade against the Ottomans later in 1444. The victory at Torvioll not only highlighted Skanderbeg's military brilliance and the effectiveness of his guerrilla tactics, but also marked the first time a smaller Christian army defeated the Ottomans in a pitched battle on European soil. This triumph shattered the myth of Ottoman invincibility and marked the beginning of nearly 40 years of war between the League of Lezhë and the Ottoman Empire. After months of negotiations, in August 1444, the Peace of Szeged was signed between Sultan Murad II of the Ottoman Empire and King Vladislaus of Hungary, which included a 10-year truce and required the Ottomans to withdraw from Serbia and Albania. Before this treaty, the Battle of Torvioll in 1444 saw Skanderbeg's victory against the Ottomans, boosting European morale and encouraging further crusades against the Ottomans and to break the treaty shortly after it was signed. However, the subsequent crusade of Varna ended disastrously for the Europeans in November 1444, leading to a period of uncertainty. In the aftermath, the Ottomans had removed a significant opposition to their expansion into Central and Eastern Europe. Subsequent battles forced a large number of Europeans like Serbia, Bosnia, and Wallachia to become Ottoman subjects. After Murad II's victory at Varna, he attempted to establish peace with Skanderbeg by sending a message to Skanderbeg in which he reminded him of how he had taken the Albanian as his son and raised him in his court, and tried to intimidate him by reminding him of the size and power of the Ottoman army. Skanderbeg responded by recalling his previous victory at Torvioll and his faith in Jesus Christ. Following this exchange, Skanderbeg prepared his men for an Ottoman incursion. Upon receiving the message, the Sultan tasked Feroz Pasha with commanding a force of about 9,000 men to monitor Skanderbeg's movements and prevent him from advancing to Macedonia. In October 1445, Feroz departed from Skopje, aiming to quickly reach Kruje and catch the Albanians off guard. Many soldiers, mistakenly believing they were going to face Iñati's regrouping army, advanced with fires. Under the assumption that the Albanian army had temporarily disbanded, Feroz planned a rapid movement through the Black Dream Valley and Prizren. However, Skanderbeg's scouts detected these maneuvers and moved to intercept Feroz. Kastrioti positioned his 3,500-man personal guard, consisting of 2,000 cavalry and 1,500 infantry, in a valley near Prizren, while sending the rest of his troops home. The Albanian forces strategically entered the forest of Mokra, familiar with a narrow valley. The Ottomans, upon entering the valley, found their main trails blocked and struggled to find an exit. The dense woods restricted the movement of the Ottoman cavalry, making them vulnerable to assaults by the Albanian infantry. Consequently, the Ottoman forces were routed, leaving 1,500 dead and 1,000 wounded or captured. Feroz Pasha perished in the battle. Following the Battle of Mokra, European morale was boosted after the defeat at Varna. Pope Eugene IV raised a hymn as a praise that Christendom has been provided with a new defender after he heard of the battle. Alfonso V of Aragon and the papacy sent praises to Skanderbeg and Durazzo. Papal ambassadors arrived in Kruje to announce the appointment of a new bishop, Peter Perletai. Skanderbeg sent 4 Ottoman standards that he had captured to Alfonso to prove his victories. Skanderbeg and Alfonso became close allies while also establishing connections with other European states. On September 27, 1446, as Sultan Murad II prepared to campaign against John Hunyadi, he dispatched 15,000 cavalry under Mustafa Pasha to Albania. Their strategy was to devastate the land and terrorize the population while avoiding direct confrontation. Mustafa split his forces, with one contingent engaging in combat and the other remaining fortified at Otonetë. Skanderbeg, upon learning of the split, attacked the fortified camp with 5,000 men, causing chaos and turning the camp into a slaughterhouse. The Ottomans suffered 5,000 casualties, and 300 were captured. This victory further solidified Skanderbeg's reputation and deterred further Ottoman incursions. After this defeat, Murad ordered Mustafa to defend the border and to not perform any actions which may cause another defeat. In 1447, after a relatively quiet year, a significant conflict erupted between League of Lezhë and Venetian Empire over a dispute regarding the possession of the fortress of Dagnum. The Venetians took the position of this fortress after a member of the Ducagini family, a powerful family in northern Albania and League of Lezhë member, ambushed and killed Lex Zaharia, Prince of Dagnum and also League member. Skanderbeg moved against several Venetian-held towns along the Albanian coastline to pressure Venice into restoring Dagnum to Albania. In 1447, Skanderbeg began the siege of Dagnum with around 3,000 to 4,000 soldiers, successfully putting pressure on Venice. In response, Venice deployed a local force of approximately 6,000 soldiers to relieve the besieged fortress and urge the Ottoman Empire to send an expeditionary force into Albania. In May 1448, Sultan Murad and Prince Mehmed, with a massive army of 80,000 to 120,000 men, marched into Ohrid and Black Dream Valley, traveling near Svetograd. Skanderbeg urgently called for material aid from Christian states. The answer, however, was negative for Venice. Instead, the only aid received came from the Neapolitans and the Ragusans. In response, Skanderbeg strengthened the garrisons of Kruje, Stolushi, Svetograd, and Berat by ordering the populations around these fortresses to take up arms. Shortly before the Ottoman siege of Svetograd began, Skanderbeg and his 12,000-strong force, 4,000 cavalry and 8,000 other soldiers, positioned themselves 7 miles, 11 kilometers from the Turkish camp, keeping their presence secret by not lighting campfires. Moisi Galami and Muzaka, of Angelina, with 30 horsemen disguised as peasants, attempted to enter the fortress but were attacked and driven off. An Ottoman pasha, recognizing Skanderbeg's plot, sent 4,000 horsemen to find him by following Moisey's band. Moisey led the Ottoman force into a valley where Skanderbeg ambushed and annihilated them on May 14, 1448, prompting Murad to order the siege to begin. In order to relieve the garrison of Cvetograd, Skanderbeg persistently harassed the Ottoman army with surprise ambushes. On June 22nd, he led a night attack on the Ottoman camp, unsettling the soldiers. Later, when the Ottomans were napping, Skanderbeg sent again Moisey Galami with some men disguised as peasants to reconnoiter. That night, the Albanians launched an attack, but the noise prevented complete surprise. Despite initial confusion, the Ottoman troops organized and pushed the Albanians out, suffering heavy casualties. To prevent further attacks, Murad sent Firas Pasha with a contingent to watch the Albanians, but it was destroyed, although the Ottomans made a breach in Cvetograd's walls. The following infantry assault was repulsed from 2,000-strong garrison under the command of Peter Prelate. After more than 2 months, as the siege of Cvetograd fighting had reached a stalemate and Murad contemplated his next move, on July 23, 1448, Skanderbeg crossed the Drine River with 9,000 men, meeting a Venetian force of 15,000 men under the command of Daniele Eurici, governor of Scuttari. Despite being outnumbered, Skanderbeg's tactical brilliance and the resilience of his troops led to a significant victory at the gates of Shkoder. The Albanians managed to inflict 2,500 casualties on the Venetian force, capturing 1,000. Skanderbeg's army suffered 400 casualties. This victory demoralized the Venetian forces and boosted Albanian morale. However, in Cvetograd, the Ottomans cut off the water supply and induced the garrison to surrender. Given the circumstance, Prelate promised a surrender if the garrison were allowed a safe passage through the Ottoman lines. Prince Mehmed suggested that the garrison should be promised safe passage and then massacred, but Murad rejected his son's proposal in fear that the rebellion would only be intensified through such an act. He decided to instead return the garrisoning force to Skanderbeg. Ottomans suffered 20,000 casualties during the siege of Cvetograd. Cvetograd was an important castle because now the Ottomans could cross into Albania uninhibited. Following the victory at Shkoder, Skanderbeg's forces clashed with the Ottoman Expeditionary Force at the Battle of Otonetë on August 14, 1448. The Ottoman forces, numbering around 15,000 soldiers, faced Skanderbeg's 6,000 soldiers. Despite the overwhelming odds, Skanderbeg's strategic acumen and the determination of his troops led to another decisive victory over the Ottoman forces, killing 3,000 men, and many were taken prisoner, including Mustafa Pasha and 12 high officers. Skanderbeg learned from the captured Ottoman officers, and that it was the Venetians who pushed the Ottomans to invade Albania to break the siege of Dagnum. The Venetians, upon hearing of the defeat of the Ottomans at Otonetë, to establish peace. Mustafa Pasha was soon ransomed for 25,000 ducats to the Ottomans. During the war, the Venetian Senate offered a substantial reward for anyone who could kill Skanderbeg. This bounty was part of Venice's strategy to weaken Skanderbeg's influence and reclaim control over the disputed territories. With Durazzo, Scuttari, and Dagnum on the point of surrender and seeing a victorious Albanian army after the Battle of Otonetë, the Venetians sent Andrea Venier to open peace negotiations with the Albanians. The war concluded with a Venetian surrender disguised as truce between the League of Lezhë and Venice, allowing Skanderbeg to focus his efforts on resisting the Ottoman Empire. The signatories agreed that Venice would retain control of Dagnum. In return, the Venetians relinquished control over certain territories on the Albanian side of the Drine River to the League of Lezhë. Additionally, Skanderbeg would receive an annual pension of 1,400 ducats and an annual tax exemption for 200 horse loads of salt from Durazzo. Wary of Skanderbeg, Venice no longer openly challenged him. This conflict showcased Skanderbeg's military prowess and his ability to unite Albanian forces against the tide of two of the most formidable empires of his era. the Ottomans and the Venetians. While Skanderbeg was preoccupied with fighting on two fronts against the Venetians and Ottomans, Hunyadi had resolved to liberate the region from Ottoman rule. In September 1448, Hunyadi led his forces across the Danube and camped in Serbia just outside the capital, Smederevo. For a full month, the Hungarians remained encamped, awaiting their German, Wallachian, Bohemian, and Albanian allies. One of the reasons Skanderbeg agreed to the peace deal with the Venetians on October 4th was to facilitate his efforts to join Hunyadi. After securing the peace, Skanderbeg marched to unite with Hunyadi's forces for what would become known as the Second Battle of Kosovo. However, the Serbian despot Đurađ Branković, who had earlier signed a truce with the Ottomans, obstructed Skanderbeg's passage. This betrayal prevented Skanderbeg from reaching Hunyadi in time. As a result, Hunyadi, with a crusader army of 24,000 men, decided to proceed without waiting for Skanderbeg's reinforcement. The ensuing battle ended in a devastating defeat for the Hungarians. As punishment for lending its support to Hunyadi, Murad attacked and submitted Wallachia in 1449, followed by Albania in 1450, where Skanderbeg continued to resist. In early 1450, Ottoman soldiers from their garrison in Gjirokastra quietly scaled the poorly guarded walls of Baradinaj, capturing the fortress and weakening Albanian morale. Gjergj Kastrioti, a notable member of the League of Lezhë, left the League in 1449 due to political complexities and changing alliances. He allied with Venice, but later returned to support key battles, including the defense of Kruje and recapture of Shkoder. During the Albanian-Venetian War, the pro-Venetian members of the League of Lezhë, such as the Balsha and Krnjević families, exited the League. Despite setbacks, Skanderbeg fortified other strongholds, especially Kruje. Anticipating an Ottoman siege, he ensured Kruje had enough supplies for 16 months. To hinder the Ottomans, villagers around Kruje burned their crops and relocated to the mountains and fortresses. On May 14, 1450, the Ottoman forces, led by Sultan Murad II and his son Prince Mehmed, began the siege of Kruje. The Ottoman army, numbering over 100,000 men, 60,000 of which were cavalry and the rest composed of janissaries, infantry, and artillery units, significantly outnumbered the defenders. Before the siege began, Skanderbeg left Kruje with 8,000 men, including seasoned warriors, local militia, and several hundred foreign mercenaries. Of these, 2,000 were infantry and 6,000 were cavalry. Skanderbeg found Mount Timanishta, now known as Skanderbeg Mountain, to be a suitable position from which to attack the Ottomans. Kruje was left with a garrison of 4,000 men under the experienced Albanian command of Vrana Khan. In addition to the predominantly Albanian forces, Vrana commanded several Germans, Italians, and Frenchmen. He emphasized the critical importance of the siege and carefully assigned their positions. Murad's herald proposed an offer of 200,000 aspers, silver coins, for Vrana, along with promises of safe conduct and religious freedom for Kruje citizens if the castle surrendered. However, when the offer was refused, Murad resorted to using his cannons. In the meantime, Ottoman engineers constructed siege towers, trebuchets, and battering rams to breach the walls of Kruje. After 5 days of siege, until a breach was finally made, the Ottomans launched their initial assault. The Sultan believed that he had the advantage and ordered his troops through the walls. It had barely begun when shouts and commotion erupted from the rear. Skanderbeg's cavalry was tearing through the outskirts of the Turkish camp. After heavy losses, Ottomans managed to push Skanderbeg's forces back. As the assault on Kruje intensified, Vrana quickly brought in fresh reinforcements, and the castle walls held. The garrison managed to push the assault back, thus gaining time to repair the walls. Murad, fearing more attacks from Skanderbeg, sent a scouting patrol towards the surrounding mountains to watch for them. Skanderbeg still managed to leave at dusk a raid on the Turkish encampment, killing several hundred men, capturing and destroying Turkish supplies, and almost losing his own life. When Skanderbeg returned to his men, his shield was so battered that its shape was scarce to be seen. When a second assault began, the Ottomans attempted to breach the gate with their lances. After suffering heavy casualties, the attackers retreated. Sultan Murad too held a council with all his generals for the next 2 days. As an immediate precaution, he decided to guard the camp against another surprise attack, placing a force of men under the command of Prince Mehmed II. Moisi Aryan at Galami feigned an attack with about 500 horsemen, causing an alarm to be raised. The Ottoman prepared for his attack, while Skanderbeg and his forces maneuvered around the camp and broke in where they were least expected. Before an organized counterattack could be launched, Skanderbeg retreated from the camp. His attacks caused the Ottomans to aim some of their cannons towards the expected guerrilla forces instead of the fortress. A large force of Ottoman cavalry was dispatched, which Skanderbeg followed up to the mouth of the Ishim River until they turned back toward Kruje. While Skanderbeg was away, a large Ottoman assault was launched on Kruje from the Tirana side, but inadvertent friendly fire forced the Ottomans to call off the assault. The Ottomans then attempted to mine the fortress, but were unsuccessful as it was built on rock. With food supplies running low, both the Ottoman and the Albanians received provisions from Venice. The Ottoman attacks made no headway, and the Ottoman army suffered many casualties, while Skanderbeg's forces had minimal losses. Moisi Galami and Tanush Topia raised a couple thousand more men, and the force was split between the three leaders, making attacks on the Ottoman camp. Skanderbeg began to move towards the camp as the Ottoman assembled 8,000 men, which began to move forward. Skanderbeg slowly retreated while Moisi and Tanush broke into the camp. The Ottoman force sent against Skanderbeg was lured towards the foothills, and the next morning, July 25th, they were surrounded and destroyed completely. The next day, Skanderbeg was seen above the rocks of Kruje, in conference with Vrana, surprising Murad. He laughed sardonically, perhaps realizing it might be wiser to leave the wild, ferocious lion alone. After Vrana had returned to the castle, a pasha was chosen to have a conference with Vrana, bringing him many rich presents. The pasha tried to convince the count that Murad would be a more suitable master than Skanderbeg was, and that the siege was almost over, but Vrana refused. As a result, drums and trumpets announced another assault on Kruje, with the Ottomans storming forth under their own artillery fire. Yet, the defenses held strong. When miners tried to dig beneath the fortress, they were thwarted by the solid rock. After a third failed assault, Murad dispatched an envoy to persuade Skanderbeg to surrender, offering an annual payment of 10,000 crowns. Skanderbeg firmly declined, responding, "Even if Murad would share his entire empire with me, I would never allow the name of Albania to be tarnished with such disgrace and infamy." During the siege, Venetians attempted to supply the Ottomans again. Skanderbeg intercepted these supplies, preventing them from reaching the Ottoman camp and further demoralizing their forces. As the siege prolonged, Ottoman supply lines strained, further weakened by Skanderbeg's continuous attacks. By September, the Ottomans realized they could not capture Kruje. Low morale, disease, and Skanderbeg's tactics forced Sultan Murad II to think of lifting the siege. As winter approached, out of fear of losing even more men in the Albanian winter, Murad was forced to concede failure, and on October 26th, he marched back to Gjergj. The siege cost 20,000 Ottoman casualties and over 1,000 Albanian casualties. However, the retreat itself caused the loss of thousands of Ottoman troops due to attacks from local Albanian militias, totaling to almost 40,000 casualties. The defenders viewed this as a significant victory, having resisted the substantial Ottoman force. Stricken by illness, Murad passed away in January 1450. Skanderbeg had reached the limits of his resources. He traveled to Ragusa to seek assistance, and the Ragusans informed Pope Nicholas V of his plight. With financial support, Skanderbeg was able to hold onto Kruje territory. His success garnered praise from across Europe, with ambassadors arriving from Rome, Naples, Hungary, and Burgundy. According to legend, one night during the siege, Skanderbeg devised a clever ruse by sending out a herd of goats with candles affixed to their horns. The encamped Ottomans, mistaking the illuminated herd for an Albanian assault, advanced to engage what they believed was an attacking force. As the Ottomans moved closer, Skanderbeg launched a surprise attack, decimating the enemy troops. After the siege was lifted, Skanderbeg celebrated his victory by designing a helmet adorned with a goat's head, symbolizing the ingenious tactic he employed that night. The account of the first siege of Kruje illustrates Skanderbeg's strategic acumen and the determination of his forces, demonstrating the effectiveness of unconventional warfare. The successful defense of Kruje became a powerful symbol of resistance against the Ottoman Empire. Skanderbeg's leadership and the resilience of the Albanian people inspired other European nations to resist Ottoman expansion. The siege showcased Skanderbeg's innovative military tactics, including guerrilla warfare, psychological warfare. His ability to outmaneuver and demoralize a much larger Ottoman force became a case study in military strategy. The siege led to important political alliances for Skanderbeg. In 1451, he became a vassal of Alfonso V of Aragon through the Treaty of Gjergj, securing much-needed military and financial support. Skanderbeg's legacy as a national hero and defender of Christian Europe against the Ottomans was cemented by his success at Kruje. The victory at Kruje had solidified Skanderbeg's reputation as a formidable military leader. The Ottoman forces, led by Sultan Murad II, had failed to capture the fortress, an event that invigorated the morale of the Albanian League of Lezhë. Skanderbeg's tactical brilliance and the fortitude of his men created a bulwark against Ottoman expansion in the Balkans. In the wake of the siege, Skanderbeg focused on strengthening the unity and military capabilities of the Albanian League. He understood that a cohesive and well-prepared alliance was crucial in fending off future Ottoman invasions. Skanderbeg fortified the key strongholds, enhanced the training of his troops, and sought support from European powers, emphasizing the common threat posed by the Ottoman Empire. While Skanderbeg successfully resisted Murad II's advances, the region suffered from poor harvests and widespread famine. After being turned away by the Venetians, he sought a stronger alliance with King Alfonso V. In January 1451, Alfonso V appointed Skanderbeg as the Captain General of the King of Aragon. Responding to Skanderbeg's appeals for assistance, Alfonso V provided support, culminating in the Treaty of Gjergj on March 26, 1451. Under the treaty, Skanderbeg formally became a vassal in return for military aid. It is believed that Skanderbeg effectively maintained full control over his territories. While the archives in Naples document payments and supplies sent to Skanderbeg, they make no mention of any tributes or payments made by him to King Alfonso, apart from the occasional gifts of Ottoman war prisoners and banners. More specifically, Skanderbeg acknowledged Alfonso's sovereignty over his lands in exchange for military support against the Ottomans. In return, King Alfonso vowed to uphold the traditional privileges of Kruje and the Albanian territories, while also granting Skanderbeg an annual payment of 1,500 ducats. Alfonso V of Aragon's alliance with Skanderbeg in 1451 was a strategic move to gain a foothold in the Balkans and support vulnerable Christian states like Moria in resisting Ottoman expansion. It showcased his vision of unified resistance against Ottoman aggression. Skanderbeg, however, promised to formally pledge allegiance to Alfonso only after successfully driving the Ottomans out of his lands, a condition that was never fulfilled during his lifetime. On April 21, 1451, Skanderbeg married Donica, the daughter of Gjergj Kastrioti, one of Albania's most prominent noblemen, further solidifying their alliance. In 1451, while Mehmed focused on defeating the Karamanids and Mentees in the east, he still intended to return to Albania. During this brief respite, Skanderbeg began rebuilding Kruje and constructed a new fortress in Modrica, located in the Drine Valley near Svetograd, an area lost in the 1448 siege where Ottoman forces had previously passed unchallenged. The fortress was swiftly completed within a few months during the summer, taking advantage of the limited Ottoman presence. Its construction dealt a significant blow to Ottoman operations, effectively hindering their advances in Albania. During this period, Venice actively worked to undermine Skanderbeg and his allies to curtail both Aragonese influence and the growth of the Albanian state. In response, Alfonso V of Aragon appointed 2 experienced Catalan officers, supported by 200 troops, as governors of Kruje, positioning himself as the nominal ruler of Albania. Despite this, Skanderbeg maintained his authority as the leading force against the Ottomans. While Gjergj Kastrioti resisted Venetian intrigue, Hal Ducagini prepared to challenge Skanderbeg. Meanwhile, Stefan Krnjević allied with Venice and accepted vassalage. Frustrated by Venice's deception and failure to honor promised payments, Skanderbeg deployed his forces toward Durazzo and Scuttari, compelling the Venetian Republic to reconsider its covert maneuvers. In 1452, Ottoman cavalry began raiding eastern Albanian territories, a strategy frequently employed by the Ottomans to weaken adversaries prior to a large-scale invasion. Sultan Mehmed, perceiving divisions among the Albanian leaders to be a critical peak, mobilized an inexperienced force of approximately 27,000 soldiers. His goal was to sufficiently weaken the Albanian defenses before launching a concentrated invasion. This force, commanded by Tahip Pasha, was divided into 2 groups, one under Tahip's leadership and the other under his subordinate, Hamza Pasha. While Mehmed was preoccupied with conflicts in the east, he permitted Hamza to return westward. Skanderbeg assembled an army of 14,000 soldiers and set out to confront Tahip Pasha's forces. His strategy was to defeat Hamza first, before maneuvering around Tahip to encircle him. Hamza commanded between 10,000 and 12,000 men and was stationed near the newly constructed fortress of Mokra. Wasting no time, Skanderbeg launched an immediate attack on July 21st. The ferocity of his assault quickly overwhelmed the Ottoman forces, forcing them into retreat. Many perished on the battlefield, while the rest were pursued as they fled. Hamza, along with his staff, was captured during the battle. Francesco Sansovino, in Historia Universal dell'Origine et Imperio de Turkey, recounts that Hamza, fearing punishment, pleaded for mercy by explaining that he had only opposed Skanderbeg because he was compelled to do so. Demetrio Franco, one of Skanderbeg's early biographers, describes how Skanderbeg's response moved the Ottoman officers to tears. Skanderbeg even shared a meal with them before ordering his prisoners to be guarded and treated respectfully. Ultimately, the men were released, but Hamza and his staff were ransomed for 13,000 ducats. Franco notes that Skanderbeg's generosity earned widespread admiration throughout Albania and the Ottoman Empire. His actions enhanced his reputation as a warrior among his troops and demonstrated his conviction that he could allow his enemies another chance to fight him, confident in his own abilities. After defeating Hamza's army, Skanderbeg retained control of the captured Ottoman foot soldiers. That same day, he dispatched men to Tahip Pasha's army, which had advanced to central Albania. These men displayed the captives and captured Ottoman standards to demoralize Tahip's forces. Unshaken, Tahip divided his army into 2 groups in the plains of Mekad, positioning his elite troops to guard the flanks. Anticipating this, Skanderbeg sent Moisi Galami to attack Tahip's rear flanks, weakening the Ottoman forces before the main assault. Once this maneuver succeeded, Skanderbeg launched his own forces into battle. During the intense clash, Moses identified Tahip, engaged him in a fierce duel, and ultimately killed him. Leaderless, the Ottoman troops panicked and fled the battlefield. Next year, in 1453, Skanderbeg led his Albanian forces to the fields of Polig near Tetovo, aiming to reclaim Svetograd from the Ottomans. His army, supported by Alfonso the Magnanimous, was equipped with artillery and arquebuses. The Albanian forces, numbering around 10,000 men, faced an Ottoman army of 14,000, commanded by Ibrahim Pasha, a former ally turned adversary. Skanderbeg's strategy was to devastate the surrounding Macedonian countryside to weaken Ottoman control and lure the garrison of Svetograd into a trap. When his forces encountered Ibrahim Pasha's army, Skanderbeg initially halted his march and considered retreating into the Mokra valley to draw the Ottomans into an ambush. However, Ibrahim Pasha chose to bivouac in the fields of Holland, blocking further incursions. As dawn broke after a fierce storm, Skanderbeg adapted his plans and launched a swift cavalry attack on the Ottomans. The surprise assault caused chaos among the enemy ranks. During the battle, Skanderbeg confronted Ibrahim Pasha in a duel, defeated him, beheading him in decisive manner. The sight of their fallen leader shattered the Ottomans' morale, leading them to retreat. The Ottomans suffered significant losses, with casualties ranging between 3,000 and 10,000, while the Albanians lost around 300. On May 29, 1453, as Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, the winds of change swept across the Balkans. The fall of Constantinople had profound effects on Europe. It marked the end of the Byzantine Empire and the beginning of Ottoman dominance in the region, and placed Albania in the direct path of intensified Ottoman expansion. With the Byzantine Empire gone, Albania became a crucial battleground and elevated Albania's role as a symbol of defiance amidst growing external pressure. In early July 1455, Skanderbeg laid siege to the Ottoman-held fortress of Berat with 14,000 men. Dozen Aragonese soldiers skilled in artillery and siege warfare. The fortress, defended by 500 Ottoman soldiers, was heavily bombarded, and the garrison proposed a truce, promising to surrender if reinforcements didn't arrive. Believing victory was close, Skanderbeg left Karl Mazaka, Thopia, in charge, and departed with a sizable contingent of his army toward Mokra, the coastal city, to survey the routes and prevent a potential surprise attack on the warriors. Unbeknownst to the Albanians, this offer was a ploy. A relief force of 20,000 Ottomans, led by Isa Bey Evans, marched from Gjirokastër and launched a surprise attack in mid-July. Amid the chaos, Vranikani, one of Skanderbeg's most trusted commanders, played a pivotal role. He fiercely resisted the initial Ottoman onslaught, repelling several waves of attacks and buying precious time for the Albanian forces. Despite his valiant efforts, the overwhelming numbers of the Ottoman reinforcements proved too much. Karl Mazaka of Thopia was killed, and the Albanian army suffered heavy losses, marking a significant setback for Skanderbeg's campaign. When Skanderbeg learned of the news, he hurried back, but by the time he arrived, the battle had already concluded. Contemporary Italian accounts portray him as displaying remarkable valor with sword and mace, saving many lives through his timely actions. Despite this, the outcome at Berat was catastrophic, severely weakening the Albanian resistance temporarily. The Ottomans retained control of Berat, and it was never reclaimed by the League. Adding to the turmoil, Moisi Galami, one of Skanderbeg's trusted commanders, defected to the Ottomans after the siege and made an attempt to defeat Skanderbeg by using the Ottoman army. He departed Edirne with an army of 15,000 soldiers, advancing toward Albania. Aware of Moisi's familiarity with his tactics and the Albanian landscape, Skanderbeg carefully arranged his defenses in preparation. In May 1456, both armies met at the plains of Oran. With his familiarity of Skanderbeg's tactics, Moisi confidently led his army against the Albanians, but Skanderbeg, commanding a smaller yet determined force of 10,000, was prepared for the challenge. The battle began with a duel that saw Zaharia Gropa, a fierce Albanian warrior, slay an Ottoman champion, igniting the spirits of Skanderbeg. Moisi attempted to intimidate the Albanians with a challenge to Skanderbeg himself, but fled before the clash, ordering his troops to advance. Skanderbeg countered with a devastating cavalry charge that broke the Ottoman ranks and left their forces in disarray. By the end of the day, Moisi's army was defeated, and he fled the battlefield, his ambition in ruins. Days later, Moisey returned to Skanderbeg, a broken yet penitent man. He laid down his arms and begged for forgiveness, confessing his betrayal and acknowledging the grave mistake he had made. Moved by Moisey's sincerity, Skanderbeg chose mercy over vengeance. He forgave Moisey, restoring him as an ally and vowing to focus on a shared cause, the resistance against the Ottomans. From that day forward, Moisey remained steadfast in his loyalty. He became one of Skanderbeg's most devoted and reliable commanders, fighting fiercely alongside the battles that followed. His courage on the battlefield and unwavering support earned him the trust of his comrades, and he sought to atone for his past betrayal with every victory he achieved. This tale of redemption and unity underscored not only Skanderbeg's strategic brilliance, but also his remarkable capacity for forgiveness and leadership. By 1455, the Ottomans had captured southern Serbia, solidifying their control over the region and paving the way for further expansion. In July 1456, Sultan Mehmed II launched a massive campaign against the Hungarian stronghold of Belgrade in Serbia, aiming to capture this strategic fortress. However, his efforts were thwarted by the legendary commander John Hunyadi, who delivered a decisive defeat to the Ottoman forces, halting their advance into Central Europe. Later that year, Ibrahim II of the Karamanid dynasty attempted to forge a grand anti-Ottoman alliance. This coalition was to include his own realm, Skanderbeg, Hunyadi, Pope Calixtus III, and Alfonso V of Aragon, working together to challenge Mehmed's dominance. Unfortunately, these plans never materialized due to various obstacles. Shortly after the victory, in August 11th, Hunyadi succumbed to the plague, leaving a void in the fight against Ottoman expansion. Earlier that same year, the fortress of Kruje was alive with celebration. Amid the chaos of resistance against the Ottoman tide, a beacon of hope was born, Gjergj Kastrioti II, the son of Albania's lion, Skanderbeg. The birth of the boy was hailed as a divine sign, a promise that the bloodline of resistance would endure. The courtiers toasted, the soldiers cheered, and even the rugged mountains seemed to stand taller that day. But not everyone celebrated. Hamza Kastrioti, Skanderbeg's nephew, sat brooding in the shadows, watching the festivities with smoldering eyes. Once a trusted commander and contender for Skanderbeg's legacy, Hamza saw his dreams crumble with the infant's cry. A baby, he thought bitterly, has stolen my birthright. The envy within him festered into something darker. By 1457, Hamza had made his move. Like a character plucked straight out of a tale from Westeros, he switched allegiances, riding into the Ottoman court with a pledge to deliver his uncle's head. Sultan Mehmed II, ever the opportunist, granted Hamza command of an Ottoman army. With insider knowledge of Skanderbeg's strategies, Hamza confidently marched on Albania, imagining himself as the new lord of the land. But Skanderbeg was no easy prey. When news of the betrayal reached him, the seasoned warrior did not falter. Instead, he rallied his forces, blending strategy with righteous fury, preparing for the Battle of Albulina unfolded as one of Skanderbeg's most brilliant military triumphs, showcasing his unmatched tactical genius. The Ottomans, led by Hamza and Ishak Bey Evernaz, invaded Albania with a massive force of 80,000 soldiers. The Ottoman army did not invade Albania as a single unit. The initial detachments, composed of Akinci cavalrymen, advanced through Dibur, where Skanderbeg managed to delay their progress. However, once the main Ottoman force arrived, the Albanians were unable to continue resisting and retreated. Recognizing that both Ottoman commanders, Ishak Bey and Hamza Kastrioti, were familiar with Albania's terrain and his own strategies, Skanderbeg decided to implement a new approach. While his usual tactic was to lure the enemy into a trap and ambush them, this time he altered the method. He divided his forces into multiple smaller groups and instructed their commanders to take different routes through forests and mountains, ensuring they remained untraceable and would not engage the Ottomans unless explicitly ordered. Supplies for the Albanian fighters were provided by local inhabitants and strategically placed depots throughout the mountains. As the Ottomans advanced through Mat, they plundered the region. Skanderbeg, meanwhile, took parallel routes through the rugged terrain. Avoiding direct confrontation, Isaak Bey refrained from besieging Kruje, Albania's primary fortress, until he could confirm Skanderbeg's status. Instead, in the late May 1457, he set up camp north of Mount Tumanishta to await Skanderbeg's emergence. This area, known as Albulina, was located south of present-day Lats. Surrounded by hills that served as protective barriers, guards were stationed across the perimeter. Since Mount Tumanishta had previously been Skanderbeg's base during his operations against the Ottoman camp during the Siege of Kruje in 1450, Isaak Bey and Hamza fortified their positions, aiming to crush any Albanian resistance they encountered. However, their efforts proved fruitless as no Albanian forces confronted them. Uncertain of Skanderbeg's whereabouts, the Ottoman leaders reinforced the northern defenses of their camp, leaving the eastern flank near Tumanishta relatively apart. Ottoman scouts crossed the Mat River into northern Albania, reaching Venetian-held Lezhë and even venturing into other Venetian territories. Skanderbeg's prolonged absence fueled speculation that he had fled, unable to confront the Ottomans, and that his forces had turned against him. This notion was reinforced by Venetians in Durrës. Despite the rumors, Isaak Bey and Hamza remained cautious, continuing reconnaissance missions that reached as far north as Scuttari, Shkoder. Skanderbeg stayed hidden in the mountains throughout July and August. Though the specifics of his army's actions during this time remain unknown, his strategy aimed to exhaust the Ottoman forces, making them wait and believe they had already achieved decisive victory. Meanwhile, Skanderbeg sent Gjergj Petri to Rome as an envoy to convince the Pope that Albania had been conquered, and that additional support was required to drive the Ottomans out. On September 17, 1457, Pope Calixtus III informed Skanderbeg that Johann Navarre had been dispatched to help fund the crusade. However, by the time Navarre arrived, the situation had drastically shifted. The local people remained loyal to Skanderbeg, keeping his location secret. Believing they had successfully defeated him, Isaak Bey and Hamza grew increasingly confident and began to spread out, relaxed, and drop their guard. When Skanderbeg deemed the moment right, he signaled his scattered forces to regroup discreetly, ensuring they remained unnoticed by the Ottomans. They assembled near the hills of Tumanishta, strategically positioned where the Ottoman camp was most vulnerable. On September 2nd, 1457, he divided his troops into 3 separate units to launch the assault. Accompanied by his most trusted men, Skanderbeg climbed to a high vantage point to survey the enemy encampment and observed that the Ottomans were at rest. He then led his chosen warriors down to eliminate any sentries, but one guard spotted him and ran into the camp, shouting his arrival. To preserve the element of surprise, Skanderbeg quickly ordered his forces to attack. Accompanied by the deafening clatter of metal tools and weapons struck together, the Albanians stormed the Turkish camp from multiple directions. The Ottomans, taken by surprise, were overwhelmed by the ferocity of the assault. Despite their superior numbers, they panicked, believing the Albanian forces were far larger than they actually were. Hamza struggled to rally his troops, insisting their opponents were few, while Isaak Bey attempted to send reinforcements to support him. However, the sudden arrival of new Albanian contingents forced Isaak Bey to shift focus. A relentless series of cavalry charges and countercharges, combined with a barrage of missiles and arquebus fire, drove the Ottomans deeper into the camp. As they realized they were surrounded, their forces descended into chaos and began to disperse. In the aftermath, Hamza was captured, though Isaak Bey managed to flee. Ottoman casualties were estimated to be as high as 30,000. Killing 15,000, an additional 15,000 men were taken prisoner. The fallen Albanian soldiers were laid to rest in the Cathedral of St. Mary in the village of Shemri, located just east of Mamarasi near the battlefield. The Battle of Albulina played a crucial role in the southern resistance against the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman historian Franz Babinger regarded it as Skanderbeg's most brilliant victory. The triumph bolstered the morale of Skanderbeg's troops, who, unlike Hamza, remained loyal and rarely deserted. Following his capture, Hamza was sent as a prisoner to Naples, within Alfonso's realm. In response, the Ottomans dispatched an envoy to negotiate the ransom for the standard-bearers and 40 distinguished prisoners. The envoy also sought to broker a truce between Mehmed and Skanderbeg, but the latter insisted that he would only agree if Svetingrad and Berat, lost in 1448 and 1450, respectively, were restored to his domain. When Mehmed refused these terms, Skanderbeg reinforced his garrisons in the vicinity of Svetingrad. Despite the Ottomans' refusal, the victory granted Albania and Italy valuable time, leading to a 3-year armistice between Mehmed and Skanderbeg in 1460. This pause allowed Skanderbeg to travel to Italy and support those who had recently ascended the throne following Alfonso's death. The battle marked a turning point in the Ottoman-Albanian War, showcasing the peak of Albanian resistance, while triggering some of the most intense Ottoman incursions into Albania. In 1458, Matthias Corvinus, son of Hunyadi, inherited his father's legacy. However, while Hunyadi had advocated for an offensive war, Matthias and the Hungarian nobility favored a defensive strategy instead. In a previous year, Skanderbeg struck with fury at Albulina, crushing a colossal Ottoman force. Pope Calixtus III, desperate after Belgrade's siege, clung to one hope: a victory to reignite the crusade. Calixtus crowned Skanderbeg captain general of the Holy See. Yet, in his empire's depths, Mehmed II burned with fury. Albania had become a thorn in his flesh, defying his unstoppable conquest. He had tasted defeat. He would not endure it. His armies would march again, this time to crush Skanderbeg entirely. Skanderbeg saw the storm approaching and turned to diplomacy, urging Europe's rulers to unite. The time for hesitation was over. War had come. In 1458, King Alfonso V of Aragon died, shaking southern Europe's balance of power. He had been Skanderbeg's greatest ally, and his loss cast uncertainty over their steadfast partnership. A decade earlier, Skanderbeg had sent General Demetrios Reers to crush a rebellion in Crotone, securing Alfonso's rule. In gratitude, Alfonso granted his warriors land in Sicily, forming the first Arboresh settlements in the area and forging a bond sealed in blood and war. Now Alfonso was no more, and Skanderbeg acted swiftly. His emissaries rode with urgency to Naples, carrying both condolences for the fallen monarch and blessings for his heir, Ferdinand I. But succession was rarely without struggle, and soon the air of mourning gave way to the drums of war. René d'Anjou emerged from the shadows to challenge Ferdinand's claim, citing his family's historic rule over Naples and the fact that Ferdinand was merely Alfonso's illegitimate son. The southern Italian nobility, with Angevin roots, turned against Ferdinand, rallying behind René, ready to overturn the Aragonese grip on the throne. Among the dissenters stood Giovanni Antonio del Balzo Orsini, the Prince of Taranto, and the infamous mercenary Jacopo Piccinino, a ruthless condottiere whose blade had long been stained with the blood of Italy's wars. The storm of rebellion gathered momentum, and soon only a handful of strongholds remained loyal to Ferdinand: Naples, Capua, Aversa, Gaeta, Troia, and Barletta, where Ferdinand was besieged, all besieged by Angevin forces. Outnumbered and teetering on the brink of ruin, Ferdinand reached beyond his kingdom for salvation. His ally, Francisco Sforza, Duke of Milan, wary of French ambition in Italy, dispatched his nephew, Alessandro Sforza, to lead an army southward. But this was not enough. Ferdinand's forces were weak, his grip on Naples fragile. Desperation turned the eyes of Rome toward Albania. Pope Calixtus III, a Spaniard who longed to see his countrymen hold their ground in Naples, found himself powerless to aid Ferdinand. So he turned to Skanderbeg, the Albanian lion, the warrior who had defied the Ottoman juggernaut, the only man who could shift the tides of war. As fate tightened its grip, Ferdinand's enemies swarmed across southern Italy, their conquest nearly complete. With Naples on the verge of collapse, the call went out. Would Skanderbeg ride to war once more? Would his sword carve salvation for a dying kingdom? The battle for Naples had begun. Skanderbeg had not forgotten his debt. The Albanian warlord owed much to Alfonso V of Aragon, his steadfast ally, the man who had given him refuge, supplies, and unwavering support against the Ottoman tide. Though Alfonso was now gone, his son Ferdinand stood in his place. Besieged by enemies from all sides, Skanderbeg could not ignore the call to arms. His loyalty demanded that he ride to Italy to repay his allegiance in blood and battle. But his decision was more than just honor. It was a calculated move to stop a greater threat. The Angevins, sworn rivals of the Aragonese, were clawing at the throne of Naples, backed by the treacherous hand of the Ottomans. Yet before he could set foot in Italy, Skanderbeg had one final chess piece to move. He reached out to Venice, the powerful maritime republic, knowing that conflict in southern Italy had softened their fears of an Aragonese-Albanian alliance. The Senate, ever pragmatic, embraced Skanderbeg's olive branch, shifting their stance toward a friendlier accord with the Albanians. But war would not wait. Pope Calixtus III passed from the world, replaced by Pope Pius II, a man who saw the brewing conflict with wary eyes. He sought peace, attempting to reconcile Giovanni Orsini, Ferdinand's bitter rival, before swords were drawn. Yet as Pius pursued diplomacy, a far more dangerous force emerged, the French king, Louis XI. Louis XI seized the Angevin cause, offering Pius a tempting proposition. If the Pope allowed the French to take Naples, Louis would abolish the pragmatic sanction of Bourges, restoring papal authority in France. He even promised 70,000 men for a papal crusade. But Pius was no fool. He saw through Louis's thinly veiled ambitions and cast aside the offer. And then, in the shadows, another venomous plot took shape. Sigismondo Malatesta, the ruthless tyrant of Rimini, sought to stop Skanderbeg before he could land in Italy. In an act of sheer treachery, he mapped the Adriatic coastline, drafting a secret manuscript detailing the perfect route for Sultan Mehmed II to invade Italy should Ferdinand dare summon Skanderbeg. But fate had different plans. The manuscript never reached the Sultan. Instead, it fell into the hands of Pope Pius II, a revelation that would change everything. The war for Naples was on the horizon. Skanderbeg was coming, and no force, Angevin, French, or Ottoman, could stand in his way. While the Ottomans devastated Bosnia and Moria, Albania remained untouched. Skanderbeg, aware of Sultan Mehmed II's movements, watched and waited. Preparing for Italy, he first turned to an internal threat, Leke Dukagjini, once anally, now seeking Ottoman favor. Skanderbeg acted swiftly, capturing Shat fortress from the Ottomans and gifting it to Venice, securing their support. As Dukagjini strengthened ties with the Ottomans, Pope Pius II issued an ultimatum: abandon the Sultan or face excommunication. Dukagjini relented, returning to Skanderbeg's side. Though Pius supported Skanderbeg, he withheld financial aid, trusting Skanderbeg's military genius alone to hold off the Ottomans. But in 1459, after conquering Serbia, Mehmed sent envoys proposing a 3-year truce, not for peace, but to pull Skanderbeg from the Pope's crusade. Skanderbeg considered accepting, desperate for respite, but Pius refused, fearing Ottoman betrayal. Doubt crept into Rome's halls, Skanderbeg's loyalty questioned. To prove himself, he rejected the truce. Yet, disillusioned, he boycotted the Council of Mantua, where the crusade was planned. The council collapsed, and with it, Skanderbeg's hope for Western aid. Left alone, he offered Rome a deal. He'd march to Italy only if peace with the Ottomans was secured. Rome reluctantly agreed. On June 9, 1460, Skanderbeg sent envoys to Ragusa, Dubrovnik, requesting ships to transport his warriors across the Adriatic. Venice was deliberately excluded, as their interest in Italy did not align with his mission. Meanwhile, emissary Martin Mazzacca presented Skanderbeg's plans in Rome, prompting Pius to alert Ferdinand and order Venice to guard Albania's shores. Finally, in mid-June 1461, Skanderbeg agreed to a truce with Mehmed. The armistice was signed, but peace in Albania was never meant to last. On September 17, 1460, Skanderbeg made his move, dispatching 500 Albanian cavalry to Barletta in Apulia, led by his young nephew Constantine. Until then, the battles for the crown of Naples had been small-scale skirmishes, but now, Ferdinand's outnumbered forces gained a deadly advantage. Though lightly armored, the Albanians fought with ferocious speed, covering 30 to 40 miles per day, far outpacing their Italian counterparts. By the time Ferdinand launched his counteroffensive, Skanderbeg's warriors had already arrived, raiding deep into Apulia, seizing supplies, and spreading terror among the Angevins. The enemy panicked. Giovanni Orsini scrambled to halt Skanderbeg's reinforcements, while René d'Anjou, stunned by the Albanian intervention, struggled to grasp why Skanderbeg had turned against him. Naples stood on the edge of war, and now the Albanian cavalry rode at its heart. The clash of wills was now fought in letters. As the battle for Naples raged, Giovanni Orsini, Prince of Taranto and Ferdinand's most dangerous rival, reached out to Skanderbeg. Though Orsini had once been an ally of Alfonso V, he had since turned against his son, siding with the Angevins in their bid for power. His message was sharp and calculated. He implored Skanderbeg to abandon his Italian campaign, warning that Ferdinand's cause was lost and that his own name would fade into oblivion. Orsini promised greater rewards under René d'Anjou, urging the Albanian warlord to choose fortune over loyalty. But Skanderbeg was unshaken. In his reply to Ferdinand, dated October 10, 1460, his words rang defiant and resolute. "May God guard your majesty from harm and danger, but however things may turn out, I am the friend of virtue, not fortune." Skanderbeg also responded to Orsini's threats with the following letter. "Moreover, you scorn our people, claiming the Albanians as nothing more than sheep, and according to your customs think of us with only insults. It would seem you know nothing of the origins of our race. Our elders were the Epirotes from whence Pyrrhus himself came forth, the might of whom the Romans could barely withstand. Those very Epirotes whom with their weapons set forth and conquered Taranto and much of Italy. There exists no challenge to their might from the likes of the Tarentines, a species of wet men born only to catch fish. And since you proclaim Albania a part of Macedonia, you grant also then our elders as nobles who went as far as India under Alexander the Great, defeating all the people that came before them with great ease. From those men descend these who you call sheep. But the nature of things is not changed. Why do your men run away in the faces of sheep?" Skanderbeg was no mercenary, no mere condottieri chasing gold. He was a warrior bound by loyalty, determined to stand by his ally, even in the face of ruin. He reinforced his stance, sending another letter to Pope Pius II, assuring Rome that the Albanians were battle-hardened and ready for war, despite the skepticism of Italy's rulers. But the purpose of these letters was not just diplomacy. They were weapons of psychological warfare. The battle for Naples was no longer just fought in the fields. It was fought in words, alliances, and the wills of men. By October 1460, Ferdinand struck back, reclaiming territories from Capua to Beneventum. But in the east, his enemies remained unshaken. The most dangerous among them was Jacopo Piccinino, the ruthless mercenary commander determined to choke off Neapolitan reinforcements before they could reach Apulia. With his eastern defenses crumbling, Ferdinand took decisive action, entrusting Constantine, Skanderbeg's nephew, with a critical mission to break Piccinino's grip on the region. Alongside Constantine's lightning-fast cavalry, Francesco del Balzo, Duke of Andria, crushed Ercole d'Este in Gargano, seizing control of the custom duties, the financial lifeline that fed Piccinino's war machine. For 3 relentless months, battle raged, and Ferdinand clawed back lost ground. But Piccinino, ever calculating, launched a counteroffensive, rallying Giovanni Orsini's men to besiege key fortresses. The pressure exploded on May 28, 1461 at Venosa, where Albanian cavalry stormed into battle, but the tide turned against Ferdinand. Forced to abandon the city, he retreated to Apulia, where fate offered a lifeline. Near Troia, a rider arrived in haste, Gjergj Kastrioti Skanderbeg's ambassador, delivering a momentous message. Skanderbeg was ready to land in Italy. Now, all that remained was securing the ships to bring the Albanian warlord to the battlefield. The war for Naples was far from over, but with Skanderbeg's arrival on the horizon, the balance of power was about to shift dramatically. The final preparations for war had begun. Before sailing for Italy, Skanderbeg needed gold, the lifeblood of armies. Pope Pius II, recognizing the Albanian warlord's indispensable role, ordered the Diocese of Dalmatia to divert a third of its crusade funds to Skanderbeg, along with 1,000 florins from the Vatican's coffers. But the moment the wealth reached Ragusan banks, fear crept in. The specter of Ottoman invasion loomed. Sejpan Vuksik Kosaka, ruler of the Duchy of St. Sava, sounded the alarm. Mehmed II would soon march on Dalmatia and Albania. The Ragusan financiers hesitated. They refused to continue funding the crusade, fearing Ottoman retribution. Obstacles mounted. Skanderbeg lacked large ships, forcing delays as Ferdinand battled for survival in Barletta. But the Neapolitan king would not wait. Before the siege tightened its grip, he dispatched 4 galleys to Albania, where Skanderbeg and his warriors stood ready. Yet even as he prepared to set sail, Skanderbeg remained vigilant. To guard his homeland, he sent a trusted captain to fortify Albania's eastern borders, ensuring the Ottomans would not strike in his absence. Meanwhile, his wife, Donica, took command of his affairs, holding his kingdom in her hands. The ships were ready. The war for Italy was about to begin. A Venetian ambassador from Constantinople carried news that Skanderbeg had assembled his army, 1,000 cavalry and 2,000 infantry, backed by papal and Neapolitan ships at Capo dell'Aci near modern-day Calvia. Then, on 21 to 22 August 1461, Skanderbeg boarded without hesitation, but he sent only a portion of his force to Apulia. He dispatched John Balshaw with 500 cavalry and 1,000 infantry to reinforce the besieged Ferdinand, while he rode to Ragusa to secure desperately needed financial support. When John's forces landed in Barletta on August 24th, panic spread among the Angevins. Giovanni Orsini, fearing Skanderbeg himself led the assault, immediately lifted the siege, abandoning their stronghold without a fight. John informed Ferdinand that Skanderbeg would follow after his mission in Ragusa, but Ferdinand, sensing the urgency of war, grew uneasy when the Albanian commander failed to arrive within 2 days. Then, on August 24th, Skanderbeg entered Ragusa, flanked by Pal Angeli, Archbishop of Durrës. His men remained on anchored ships, while he stepped into the city, met with ceremony and celebration. The streets overflowed with people eager to witness the warrior they had only heard about in legend. He toured the city's fortifications, inspected its weaponry, and at last secured the funds he had come for. With his supplies replenished and his forces ready, Skanderbeg set sail for Apulia on August 29th, but fate threw one last obstacle in his path. A tempest struck, forcing him to anchor off a Dalmatian island. Only on September 3rd, 1461, did he finally reach Barletta, ready to turn the tide of war. The battle for Italy raged on. Though the Angevins had lifted their siege of Barletta, their forces remained a threat, lurking in the shadows. When Skanderbeg arrived, Ferdinand entrusted him with command of Barletta, while the king himself rode to Ariano Irpino. Now in full control, Skanderbeg wasted no time. His next target was Ferdinand's enemies. The ranks of his adversaries were formidable. Giovanni Orsini, Jean d'Anjou, Piccinino, and Francesco del Balzo, all entrenched in Andria, confident in their 7,000 heavily armored cavalry. But Skanderbeg's Albanian warriors fought differently. Their swift horses, light armor, and fluid formations made them unstoppable, slicing through rigid Italian lines with merciless precision. In one daring assault, an Albanian fighter captured Alois Minucciolo, lord of the castle of Monte Sant'Angelo, imprisoning him in Barletta's fortress. Years later, Ferdinand would reward Skanderbeg's loyalty, gifting him the castle itself. Sensing their forces overpowered, Piccinino and his commanders attempted direct battle, but the combined strength of Albanian and Neapolitan forces forced them into retreat, fleeing from Andria's plains to Acquaviva del Fonte, Venice. Hearing of their humiliating withdrawal, swiftly alerted Francisco Sforza. But Skanderbeg was far from finished. He marched on Taranto, where Giovanni Orsini ruled. Desperate, Orsini once again pleaded for Skanderbeg to halt his invasion, but Ferdinand distrusted him. The prince had sworn loyalty before, only to betray. Skanderbeg pressed forward, his raids tearing through Orsini's lands. In a brilliant maneuver, Skanderbeg divided his forces. Moise Aryan at Galami, Vladan Jurica, and Skanderbeg himself led simultaneous attacks in three directions, striking without mercy, without pause, exhausting Orsini's army dead. By October, with the Angevins absent, Skanderbeg pillaged Orsini's territories from Barletta and Andria, while Ferdinand crushed resistance in Calabria, reclaiming Cosenza and Castrovillari. Desperate, Orsini begged for a truce. Skanderbeg refused. On October 27th, Skanderbeg captured Gesualdo, proving that his campaign would not cease. Finally, Piccinino himself sued for peace. Believing victory was near, Skanderbeg accepted, hoping the bloodshed would end. But in war, peace is never certain. The fragile truce shattered when reports surfaced that Piccinino had no intention of keeping his word. Skanderbeg wasted no time. Battle was inevitable. Under the cover of moonlight, he led his warriors toward the Angevin camp, but the enemy had already fled, warned by a deserter. Undeterred, Skanderbeg returned to Barletta, reinforced by Ferdinand's troops, and split his army, one force under Alessandro Sforza, the other under his own command. Their target, Troia, knowing battle would erupt between Troia and Lucera, Skanderbeg seized Seggiano, a strategic mountain, giving his forces a refuge if the fight turned against them. But Piccinino had the same idea. As his army closed in, the two forces collided in a brutal clash. The battle raged until dusk, and Jean d'Anjou's troops crumbled under Skanderbeg's relentless assault. Piccinino fled, abandoning his campaign and seeking refuge with Sigismondo Malatesta, plotting new attacks against the Papal State. With the Angevin forces broken, Skanderbeg set his sights on Trani, a crucial stronghold in Apulia. On December 28, 1461, Gratiani, the vice-commander, capitulated. After weeks of marauding, his Albanian warriors joined Alessandro Sforza, and all recaptured fortresses were delivered to Ferdinand. With their fortunes dwindling, Ferdinand's enemies sought peace, offering 150,000 ducats, an offer Ferdinand refused. This marked one of Skanderbeg's last acts in Italy. By January 1462, he departed Apulia, leaving behind his soldiers to secure Ferdinand's reign. Returning through Ragusa, he was greeted as a hero, but bad weather delayed his departure. After 10 days, he finally sailed home, purchasing grain from Sicily to support his warriors. Though Skanderbeg had left Italy, his impact endured. Ferdinand achieved a decisive victory at Orsara in August 1462, largely thanks to the Albanian campaign. Iovianus Pontanus, in his book De Bello Neapolitano, proclaimed Skanderbeg's swift tactics as the key to Ferdinand's success. His triumphant return to Albania did not bring peace. War was coming. By July 1462, the Ottoman armies resumed their invasion, and within 1 month, Skanderbeg defeated 3 Ottoman forces. Though he signed a peace treaty in April 1463, he soon turned to Venice, joining Pius II's newly declared crusade against the Ottomans. The warrior of Albania was not done fighting. A new war was on the horizon. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of legendary leaders. Between 1460 and 1462, Skanderbeg fought in Italy on behalf of Ferdinand, the King of Naples, whose nobles were divided, many backing an invasion led by John d'Anjou, Duke of Lorraine. Skanderbeg played a pivotal role in the conflict, commanding the forces that decisively defeated d'Anjou at the Battle of Seggiano near Troia. Meanwhile, Mehmed had completed his conquest of the Peloponnese and Trebizond. Upon learning of Skanderbeg's presence in Italy, he dispatched an invasion force to Albania. Skanderbeg's wife, Donica, urgently appealed to him in a letter, urging his return. Realizing his homeland was in jeopardy, Skanderbeg left Ferdinand in charge of the weakened Angevin opposition and set sail for Albania, taking a small portion of his troops while leaving the rest behind to continue assisting Ferdinand. Mehmed dispatched 23,000 cavalry under Sinan Bey to the outskirts of Albania. Upon hearing of this movement, Skanderbeg swiftly assembled 8,000 men and set out to confront Sinan. Anticipating the Ottomans' rout, he strategically positioned his forces on a mountain overlooking the path near Mokra, arriving there under the cover of night before the enemy's approach. On July 7, 1462, as the Ottoman forces drew near, Skanderbeg ordered his men to create a thunderous noise with battle horns, projecting the illusion of a vast army. Moments later, the Albanians launched a fierce assault, plunging the Ottoman ranks into chaos. Many were cut down in the disorder, and the remaining forces fled in disarray. Victorious, the Albanians gathered a wealth of spoils and returned to Albania, heavily laden with their winnings. During this time, Venetian hostility towards Skanderbeg grew, as they viewed his expanding influence in Italy and Albania as a threat to their territorial ambitions. This escalating tension eventually led to an undeclared conflict between the two sides. Trade between the League of Lezhë and the Albania Veneta was cut off. Enraged by his defeat and sensing an opportunity, Mehmed struck back the following month, sending 3 separate Ottoman armies into Macedonia in preparation for an invasion of Albania. Skanderbeg, learning of the impending offensive, swiftly marched into Macedonia to intercept the threat. Leading a large force, Hasan Bey advanced through the same pass Sinan had taken a month earlier, unaware that Skanderbeg was already prepared. Seizing the moment while the Ottomans remained idle, Skanderbeg ordered the enemy guards to be eliminated, sparking a fierce battle. The clash resulted in devastating losses for the Ottomans, with most of their soldiers cut down. Amid the chaos, Hasan himself was struck by an arrow, piercing his right arm. Despite his army's annihilation and the late hour, he retreated with his most loyal troops to a more secure position. By morning, Skanderbeg realized Hasan's whereabouts and immediately pursued him. Cornered and desperate, Hasan emerged unarmed, surrendering to Skanderbeg and pleading for mercy. Following the destruction of Hasan's army, Isuf Bey set out to defeat Skanderbeg and avenge his fallen ally. With the Sultan's approval, he led 18,000 troops to Skopje before advancing toward Polog near Tetovo. However, his fate mirrored Hasan's. Skanderbeg launched a devastating assault, obliterating Isuf's forces. In the chaos, the Pasha fled, abandoning his troops to be systematically wiped out. Karaza Bey, one of the Sultan's seasoned commanders, was drawn into Albania in pursuit of glory, despite his advanced age. Having previously fought alongside Skanderbeg in Anatolia to suppress the Sultan's rebellious subjects, Karaza had earned a reputation as a highly capable leader, entrusted with numerous crucial missions. The Sultan granted him command of 30,000 cavalry, and he swiftly advanced toward Albania. Unlike his predecessors, Karaza opted to march through Lower Dibra rather than Upper Dibra, passing by Ohrid. Ahead of his main army, a scouting force of 4,000 was sent to gather intelligence on Albanian positions, but most of this detachment was destroyed. Upon hearing of the setback, Karaza erupted in fury, not over the loss of his men, but over his disrupted strategy. Determined to outmaneuver Skanderbeg, he devised a ruse, dispatching envoys to accuse Skanderbeg of cowardice and challenge him to fight in open battle rather than rely on the forest for cover. Skanderbeg, recognizing the deception, dismissed the proposal and sent the envoys away. Seeking another advantage, Karaza attempted to win favor among the local population, but Skanderbeg, ever vigilant, launched a surprise assault on the Ottoman camp. The attack was so swift and brutal that confusion spread through the ranks, plunging the Ottomans into chaos. While heavy rain and fierce winds prevented Skanderbeg from fully annihilating the enemy forces, his troops still inflicted significant losses. Karaza, realizing the peril, managed to retreat with much of his army and fled to Istanbul. The Sultan, recognizing his success in preventing total disaster, granted him pardon, a fate better than that of his defeated counterparts. Skanderbeg secured a remarkable victory by defeating a combined Ottoman force of over 48,000 men in 3 separate battles, the first time he had won 3 engagements in a single month. In the summer of 1463, Sultan Mehmed II gathered a massive army near Skopje, though its target was Bosnia. During a League of Lezhë assembly, Tunç Thopia urged for peace, fearing renewed conflict. Skanderbeg opposed the idea, but was outvoted, leading to the Peace of Skopje on April 27, 1463. Despite this, Skanderbeg secretly assured Pope Pius II that he would resume hostilities when ordered. Concerned by the peace agreement, Venice sought reconciliation with Skanderbeg, and on August 20th, 1463, they formed an alliance against the Ottomans. Venice pledged military support, financial aid, naval protection, and refuge for Skanderbeg if he were forced to flee Albania. His son was granted Venetian nobility, and his pension arrears were settled. Later that year, Pope Pius II launched his crusade, reigniting the war between Albania, Venice, and the Ottoman Empire. In November 1463, Pope Pius II declared a crusade against the expanding Ottoman Empire. A key ally in this effort was Skanderbeg, the revered Albanian leader, who was poised to play a central role in the campaign. The Republic of Venice also joined the crusade. Despite papal efforts, most major European powers declined to participate. Florence, Milan's Duke Francesco Sforza, France's King Louis XI, and Ferdinand I of Naples each gave their refusals. Still, the Venetians sent 500 cavalry and 500 infantry under the leadership of the Italian commander Antonio de Cosenza, better known as Cimarasto, to aid Skanderbeg. Meanwhile, in the north, Hungarian King Matthias Corvinus succeeded in retaking strongholds in Bosnia, including the important fortress of Jezza, recently seized by the Ottomans. Sultan Mehmed II responded with a campaign of devastation through Bosnia, expecting resistance to collapse. The Hungarians stood firm, though the Ottomans made limited gains and briefly besieged Jezza. Matthias managed a breakout, though 200 of his men were captured and executed in Constantinople. Nonetheless, the fortress held, forcing the Sultan to withdraw. In response to Skanderbeg's earlier incursion into Macedonia, the Sultan reinforced fortresses in the region and dispatched Seramet Bey with 14,000 cavalry to Ohrid, near Skanderbeg's territory. After hearing of this, Skanderbeg assembled 12,000 cavalry and marched toward the city, even after receiving grim news that Pope Pius had died shortly after arriving in Ancona to join the crusade. Before the battle, Skanderbeg left Cimarasto and his Italian detachment at Valakard and pushed into Macedonian lands, raiding as he advanced. At Ohrid, he encouraged his troops with a rousing speech and devised a cunning tactic. A 500-strong cavalry unit led by Peak Emanueli and Peter Angeli would approach the city gates, stir up dust, and provoke the garrison. As planned, the Ottomans launched a pursuit, only to fall into an ambush. Skanderbeg's forces emerged and crushed the Ottoman troops, killing 10,000 and capturing 12 units, including Seramet Bey's own son. Losses among the Albanians and their Venetian allies were minimal. Legend has it Skanderbeg celebrated with a meal of letnica, a prize trout from Lake Ohrid once reserved for Byzantine emperors. The 12 captured Ottoman officers were ransomed for a hefty 40,000 ducats, which Skanderbeg shared equitably with his troops. Although Ohrid itself wasn't taken, the campaign was hailed as a success by the Venetian Senate. The larger crusade, however, unraveled after Pope Pius's death, with disillusioned cardinals redirecting raised funds to Venice. Seizing the opportunity, Sultan Mehmed sent Balabin Badera, an Albanian-born Ottoman commander, to challenge Skanderbeg. Though he initially replaced Suramet in Ohrid, Balabin suffered defeat at Vekel and continued to clash with Skanderbeg until his mortal wounding at the Second Siege of Kruje. Albania, 1465. The wind carries the scent of pine and powder. The Balkans stand battered, but not broken. In this land of stone and story, two sons of the same earth are about to clash, not as brothers, but as bitter foes. For over 2 decades, Skanderbeg, the Eagle of Albania, had etched his legacy into the mountains and valleys of his homeland. With masterful ambushes, fearless frontal assaults, and an unmatched command of the terrain, he humbled wave after wave of Ottoman invaders, turning each battlefield into a testament of defiance. But now a new shadow loomed. Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire had given Balabin Badera, the Sanjak-Bey of the Sanjak of Ohrid, the reins of the Ottoman campaigns in Albania, to do what others could not: break Skanderbeg. Balabin had been a peasant in Skanderbeg's ancestral domains and was raised through the Devshirme system to become a janissary for the Sultan. Much like Skanderbeg, aware that defeat was a real possibility, Balabin sent Skanderbeg lavish gifts, hoping to buy mercy should he fall into his rival's hands. Though the two had once crossed paths in the Ottoman court, Balabin's sentiments were far from friendly. Beneath a facade of camaraderie, he harbored deep resentment, feigning alliance while plotting against the Albanian hero. When word reached Balabin that Skanderbeg lay camped in Baikal, he saw his opening, and in April 1465 rallied 18,000 men to begin a march. Skanderbeg positioned his force of 5,000 troops at the strategic center of Baikal Valley, while the Ottomans set theirs across the divide, near the mountain that marked the valley's terminus. Anticipating their assault, Skanderbeg kept his troops in a constant state of readiness. On the eve of battle, he crafted a bold deception. He would feign weakness, letting fear and hesitation seep into the Ottoman lines. Once drawn into the valley under the illusion of an easy victory, the enemy would be ambushed. The Albanians would then press the attack up into the hills, halting only at the point beyond which a counterstrike could be launched. The following day, Balabin crossed beyond the hills and launched a sudden assault on Skanderbeg's position. Calm and composed, Skanderbeg allowed the Ottoman forces to draw near before unleashing a fierce counterattack. The valley erupted into brutal combat. Blood was spilled on both sides, but the Albanian forces stood their ground. As the Ottoman lines fractured and retreated, Skanderbeg's strategy had proven successful. Most of his men halted pursuit at the hills, adhering to his orders to avoid a potential countertrap. But not all listened. A group of Albanian officers, caught in the rush of victory, pressed onward in pursuit. The Ottomans, however, had regrouped. Turning on their pursuers, they ambushed the scattered Albanians, forcing them to flee toward higher ground. There, on a hilltop, the officers mistook Ottoman infantrymen for Christian allies. It was a fatal error. Surrounded and captured, they were taken as prisoners and delivered into the hands of Balabin Badera. Among them were Moise Galami, Mladen Jurica, Skanderbeg's relative, Muzek Arianidi, Skanderbeg's nephew, Jin Mazaka, John Parley, Nikol Berisha, Gjergj Kuka, and Jin Mainshur. In an effort to secure their release, Skanderbeg dispatched an ambassador to the Sultan, pleading for the safe return of his captured commanders and warning that failure to do so would result in the execution of Ottoman prisoners held by the Albanians. Despite the plea, the Sultan remained resolute. Informed of the prisoner's importance by Balabin Badera, He refused any clemency and instead ordered a harrowing punishment. The Albanian officers were subjected to relentless torture, their bodies flayed over 15 agonizing days. In the end, their remains were cast aside, left to be devoured by dogs. As dusk fell upon the blood-drenched plains of Baikal, sorrow gripped the Albanian camps. Skanderbeg's envoy had returned, not with hope, but with horror. The Sultan had dismissed the appeal, and the captured officers had met a gruesome fate. Their disfigured corpses were thrown to the dogs, a cruel gesture meant to shatter the spirit of their comrades. In July 1465, Skanderbeg and Balaban Badera clashed near Metsad, close to Otonetë in Upper Dibra. Both sides fielded roughly 10,000 troops. Balaban, hoping to exploit Skanderbeg's absence, attempted to bribe a local Albanian camp. But Skanderbeg, warned of the plot, returned swiftly, marching through Ohrid to surprise the Ottomans. Unaware of Skanderbeg's return, Balaban ordered an attack. Instead, his forces were ambushed. Albanian cavalry struck from one side, while Italian volunteers attacked on the other. The battle ended in a decisive Albanian victory. Casualty figures remain unknown, but sources note that few Ottomans escaped, and Ottoman flags were captured. Balaban retreated to Constantinople, only to return with larger forces. In August 1465, Balaban launched his most ambitious military campaign against Skanderbeg. Despite a setback at the Battle of Baikal in April, he managed to inflict significant casualties on Skanderbeg's troops and was soon favored by Sultan Mehmed II. Both Balaban and Gjergj Kastrioti, Albanian peasants by birth, were selected to lead a combined offensive, which some scholars interpret as the Sultan's attempt to spark a social revolution within Albania and erode Skanderbeg's support. Balaban was entrusted with commanding two separate military units. Prior to launching the campaign, he extended several gifts to Skanderbeg, hoping to win his favor. Skanderbeg, however, rejected the overture and sent back a pickaxe and a plow, symbolizing Balaban's humble origins and rebuking him for turning against his fellow Albanians. Deeply insulted, Balaban vowed revenge. The campaign plan involved a dual march into Albanian territory, Balaban leading 24,000 troops from Dibra, Otonetë leading 16,000 from Berat. Their goal was to converge at Kruje, anticipating that Skanderbeg would engage one army, allowing the other to strike his forces from behind. While many of Skanderbeg's allied nobles favored a defensive stance, Skanderbeg recognized the danger of allowing the two Ottoman forces to unite. Recently bolstered by reinforcements and supplies from Ferdinand I, swelling his ranks to 12,000, Skanderbeg resolved to strike Balaban first. Skanderbeg stationed his troops near Otonetë, in the fields of Baikal, where Balaban planned to advance. Balaban attempted deception by bribing Albanian sentries to abandon their posts late at night, but Skanderbeg anticipated the ploy. He secretly positioned 8,000 cavalry and 4,000 infantry in the surrounding units. After marching 8 miles to locate Balaban's army, Skanderbeg encountered him. Balaban ordered his forces to capture Skanderbeg, intending to eliminate his army thereafter. Rallying his troops, Skanderbeg divided them into 4 detachments under Tanush Thopia, Pal Angeli's brother-in-law, Zaharia Gropa, and himself. The Ottomans, hesitant to pursue, were lured into the battlefield where Skanderbeg had set his trap. Albanian forces emerged from concealment and encircled the enemy. Overwhelmed, the Ottomans fled in disarray, suffering heavy losses. Balaban escaped, hiding with part of his force until the Albanians departed. As Skanderbeg received word from his sister that Otone's army had reached central Albania and was razing the countryside, he quickly mobilized to confront this new threat. Balaban, meanwhile, returned to the Sultan empty-handed and defeated. Gjergj Kastrioti entered Albania under the assumption that he would rendezvous with his fellow commander Balaban. Instead, he was unknowingly heading into a confrontation with Skanderbeg himself. Prior to the march, Skanderbeg rallied his troops, reminding them of their recent triumph over a force twice their size and urging confidence against Otone's army, which numbered just 16,000. the Albanian forces advanced toward Kashar, near modern-day Tirana, where Otonetë troops were stationed. Upon arrival, Skanderbeg dispatched 500 cavalrymen to bait the Ottomans into a reckless maneuver. The strategy worked. Otonetë fragmented his army into 3 units in an attempt to encircle and overwhelm the Albanian horsemen, who feigned retreat while drawing the enemy deeper into vulnerable ground. As the Ottoman soldiers pressed forward, the hidden Albanian forces launched a ferocious counterattack, catching them off guard. Amid the chaos, Skanderbeg spotted Jakub Otonetë on the battlefield and struck him with a spear beneath the chin, dealing a decisive blow. Otonet's death shattered Ottoman morale. The remaining troops broke formation and fled in disarray, only to be relentlessly pursued by Skanderbeg's forces, who inflicted devastating losses in the aftermath. The Ottoman forces suffered staggering losses, with contemporary estimates suggesting over 24,000 soldiers were dead, wounded, or taken prisoner. In keeping with tradition, Skanderbeg permitted his troops to collect spoils from the battlefield. The triumphant Albanian army marched into the city of Kruje, where once doubtful citizens now erupted in celebration upon their return. Skanderbeg promptly informed nearby ambassadors of the resounding victory, generously offering them a substantial share of the captured loot as a gesture of diplomacy and strength. But the story doesn't end here. As news of the defeat reaches the Ottoman court, tensions mount. The Sultan demands results. Balkan, still seething from humiliation, prepares for a final reckoning. In the next episode, the conflict escalates into the decisive clash, the Second Siege of Kruje, where Skanderbeg and Balkan face each other once again, this time in a battle that could shape the fate of Albania. In the shadowed valleys and craggy peaks of Albania, the year 1466 dawned with fire and peril. Sultan Mehmed II, flush with victory over Constantinople and the sprawling ruins of Byzantium, turned his wrath towards Skanderbeg, the indomitable Albanian rebel whose banner had defied the empire for more than 2 decades. This time, Mehmed meant to end it. Years earlier, the Sultan had placed his hopes in Balban Badera, an Albanian-born commander raised through the brutal Defserm system. Balban had fought Skanderbeg before and lost, but Mehmed believed kin would defeat kin. He elevated Balban to Pasha and made him Sanjak Bey of Ohrid, charging him with the annihilation of Skanderbeg's resistance. Yet diplomacy came first. Mehmed sought peace with Venice and Hungary, hoping to isolate Albania. Venice, entangled in its own war in Amoria, rebuffed the offer. Hungary, under King Matthias Corvinus, rejected Mehmed's overtures, correctly sensing that Albanian ruin would soon lead to Hungarian peril. In 1463, after the Venetians recaptured several fortresses in the Morea, Sultan Mehmed II responded swiftly by dispatching Grand Vizier Mahmud Pasha Angelovic, of Serbian origin and descended from the Byzantine Angelos family, prompting Venice to withdraw. At the same time, Hungarian forces under Matthias Corvinus launched a successful offensive in Bosnia. However, when a massive Ottoman army advanced, they chose to retreat from several of the occupied areas. Responding to Pope Pius II's call for a crusade against the advancing Ottoman Empire, Skanderbeg was the first to take up arms, engaging in 9 major battles against Ottoman forces between 1462 and 1465, and winning all of them. Following the death of Pope Pius and the withdrawal of the Hungarians and Venetians from the conflict, the crusade collapsed before it could begin, leaving Skanderbeg to confront Mehmed's wrath alone. The stage was thus set for a dramatic showdown between Skanderbeg and Mehmed. And so, Mehmed began his march toward Albania. In June 1466, his vast army, estimated between 100,000 and 200,000 soldiers, swept into the region, leaving destruction in its wake. Mehmed's strategy hinged on isolating Kruje, Albania's central fortress, by systematically weakening Skanderbeg's military strength, severing supply lines, and undermining his political and moral support. Once Kruje stood alone, it would be encircled and besieged. To carry out this plan, Ottoman forces split into 2 columns, one advancing through the Shkumbin River Valley, the other through the Black Drine River Valley. Troops spread across both flanks, targeting borderlands with ruthless efficiency. Their campaign was marked by terror. Villages were torched, civilians slaughtered, and any resistance met with brutal retaliation. In desperation, many fled to safer regions. Albania was bleeding. With the situation growing dire, Skanderbeg made a painful choice. He sent his wife Danica, their young son John, and a group of noble allies across the Adriatic to seek refuge in Italy. Their arrival sent shockwaves through Italian courts. In Naples, King Ferdinand I saw the writing on the wall. If Albania fell, Italy could be next. Venice began reinforcing its Albanian coastal holdings, fearing Ottoman might soon appear on the horizon. As Mehmed tightened his grip around Kruje, Skanderbeg sailed for Italy himself, rallying what support he could, where he spent approximately 40 days appealing to various powers. His first major stop was Rome, where he met Pope Paul II. The Pope praised Skanderbeg's valor and acknowledged the threat posed by the Ottomans to Christian Europe. However, the Papal States were mired in internal political concerns and wary of provoking Ottoman retaliation. Paul II offered moral support and vague promises of assistance, but refrained from committing troops or substantial funds. Italy at the time was politically fragmented. The Papal States, the Kingdom of Naples, Venice, Milan, Florence, and other regional powers operated independently, often in rivalry. Naples, under King Ferdinand, had previously supported Skanderbeg and maintained a personal alliance. Yet Ferdinand's kingdom was still recovering from internal strife and wary of reigniting conflict with the Angevin claimants. Venice, though economically threatened by Ottoman expansion, prioritized trade and avoided direct military engagement. Milan and Florence remained passive, focused on their own affairs. Skanderbeg also visited Naples, where Ferdinand received him warmly, but, like the Pope, offered limited material support. The fractured nature of Italian politics meant that no unified Christian response could be mobilized. Each power feared entanglement, and none wanted to bear the burden of a crusade alone. After nearly 40 days of tireless diplomacy in Italy, Skanderbeg returned to Albania with limited reinforcements, just a handful of Venetian soldiers and local volunteers. Though no grand crusade followed him, he came back resolute, his spirit unshaken. He rallied a force composed primarily of Albanian warriors, joined by a small band of Venetian allies and Italian fighters, men inspired by legend and driven by a hunger for honor. Upon his arrival, Skanderbeg swiftly reorganized his command. Several key Albanian leaders joined him in the renewed campaign. Together, they formed a disciplined army of roughly 13,400 fighters, bolstered by Venetian support and local resolve. Inside Kruje, the fortress was commanded by Tanush Thopia, a seasoned Albanian noble and loyal ally of Skanderbeg. He was the sole commander inside the castle, entrusted with its defense. The garrison, numbering around 4,000 men, held firm against repeated Ottoman assaults. Venetian support provided artillery and supplies, but the burden of defense fell squarely on Thopia's shoulders. Despite months of siege, Mehmed, the conqueror of Constantinople, failed to take Kruje. The terrain, disease, and relentless resistance wore down his forces. Frustrated, the Sultan withdrew in late 1466 and returned to Istanbul. Before leaving, he appointed Balaban to continue the siege. Balaban was given 40,000 troops and a clear mission: eliminate Skanderbeg and break Kruje. Mehmed also ordered the construction of a new fortress at Elbasan, intended as a permanent Ottoman base in central Albania. In early 1467, Balaban received reinforcements from his brother Jonas Badera, who led a separate Ottoman column. Skanderbeg intercepted Jonas' force and annihilated it in a surprise ambush, eliminating a key part of the Ottoman reinforcement plan. This victory gave Skanderbeg the momentum to prepare a full counteroffensive. Skanderbeg then split his army into 3 columns to encircle Balaban's forces near Kruje. Skanderbeg led the central column. Lek Dukajini, a powerful northern Albanian noble and ally, led the second. Niccolo Moneta, a Venetian commander and military advisor, led the third. The columns attacked from multiple directions: north, south, and west, trapping Balaban's army between the mountains and the fortress walls. The Albanian forces launched coordinated assaults, exploiting terrain and timing to overwhelm the Ottomans. In the final battle, Balaban was killed by Gjergj Kastrioti, one of Skanderbeg's trusted commanders. He struck him down in the heat of battle, fulfilling a personal and strategic blow to Ottoman leadership. Balaban's death shattered Ottoman morale. Ottoman forces were left surrounded, and according to Bernardino de Geraldinus, a Neapolitan functionary, 10,000 men remained in the besieging camp. In the Albanian camp, a war council convened. Lek Dukajini, whose lands had suffered under Ottoman terror, called for the execution of the trapped enemy soldiers. Other commanders agreed, citing the massacres and destruction inflicted on their people. Skanderbeg opposed the idea. He argued for restraint, emphasizing Christian values and the importance of maintaining diplomatic credibility with Venice and the papacy. The debate was tense between vengeance and principle. While the commanders deliberated, Ottoman troops attempted a breakout through the northern passes. Skanderbeg acted swiftly. Albanian cavalry intercepted the retreating enemy in the mountain terrain, where ambushes proved devastating. Hundreds of Ottoman soldiers were killed and many were captured. The siege was broken. Back at camp, Dukajini approached Skanderbeg. "They chose their fate," he said. Skanderbeg replied, "Let history judge. We gave him the chance." Kruje remained unconquered. The fortress stood as a symbol of Albanian defiance, and the episode marked a triumph not only of arms, but of moral resolve. But the war was not over. Only 2 months later, Sultan Mehmed II returned with renewed force. Angered by Balaban's defeat and the failure of the previous siege, he launched the Third Siege of Kruje in the summer of 1467. This time, the campaign was broader and more coordinated. Ottoman forces poured in from Bosnia, Serbia, Macedonia, and Greece, aiming to surround the entire country and strangle Skanderbeg's mobility. Skanderbeg, rather than retreating immediately to the mountains, confronted the Ottoman advance led by the Grand Vizier, Mahmud Pasha Angelovic, at Broshk, near the Shkoder River. His goal was to buy time for civilians to evacuate and for his forces to regroup. Despite the overwhelming numbers, Kruje held firm. The defenders, supported by Venetian allies, resisted fiercely. Eventually, the siege was lifted, possibly due to disease outbreaks and logistical strain. The Ottomans withdrew once again, and Albania remained defiant. This campaign marked one of the final moments of unity among Albania's principalities under Skanderbeg's command. Though often divided by local rivalries, they stood together in defense of their homeland, bound by necessity, courage, and the will to resist. In January 1468, while in Lezhë, Skanderbeg fell ill, likely from malaria or a fever contracted during his campaigns. On January 17, 1468, Albania's greatest leader died. When Gjergj Kastrioti Skanderbeg, the Dragon of Albania, drew his final breath, the land trembled not from the clash of swords, but from the silence that followed. For over 2 decades, Skanderbeg had defied the might of the Ottoman Empire, forging a fragile but fierce Albanian resistance that held the line against one of the most powerful empires of the age. His death was not just the passing of a man, it was the unraveling of a bulwark. His death was a devastating blow. The League of Lezhë, the confederation of Albanian princes Skanderbeg had united in 1444, had long relied on his charisma, military genius, and diplomatic finesse. With his death, the League lost its keystone. Though his son Gjergj Kastrioti II was named heir, he was still a child, and the vacuum of leadership was immediate and devastating. Venice, once a reluctant ally, offered nominal support but was more concerned with its own maritime interests. Rome mourned the loss of Christendom's most stalwart defender in the Balkans, but papal promises of aid remained largely rhetorical. The Albanian princes, once galvanized by Skanderbeg's vision, began to fracture under the weight of Ottoman pressure and internal rivalries. Kruje, the mountain fortress that had withstood 3 major Ottoman sieges under Skanderbeg's command, now stood vulnerable. In 1478, a decade after his death, the Ottomans returned under Sultan Mehmed with overwhelming force. The defenders, led by Skanderbeg's loyal lieutenant Lek Dukajini, resisted valiantly, but without the unifying presence of their leader, the city fell after a brutal siege. Kruje fell in June 1478, and despite the Ottomans' pledge to spare the inhabitants if the fortress surrendered, they executed all the men and enslaved the women. The fall of Kruje marked the symbolic end of Albanian resistance. By 1479, nearly all of Albania had fallen under Ottoman control, bringing an end to nearly 7 decades of conflict that had begun with the resistance of the Albanian Principalities, endured through Skanderbeg's 25-year struggle, and persisted for nearly a decade after his death. The dream of an independent Albanian state would lie dormant for centuries. As Ottoman rule tightened, many Albanians, especially nobles and warriors, fled westward. Thousands resettled in Italy, particularly in Calabria and Sicily, where they established arborish communities that preserved their language, customs, and memory of Skanderbeg for generations. These exiles became living embers of a national identity that refused to be extinguished. Though Albania fell, Skanderbeg's legend only grew. In the Ottoman imagination, he became a symbol of defiance and a cautionary tale. In Europe, he was lionized as the Christian knight who had held the gates of the West. His sword, once a terror to the sultans, became a relic of resistance, passed down in whispers and songs. For the Albanian people, Skanderbeg's death was not the end. It was the beginning of a long, painful endurance. His memory became a rallying cry, a sacred inheritance that would one day help reignite the struggle for freedom. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of legendary